The sun beat down mercilessly on Unionville, Nevada, casting long shadows across the dusty Main Street as Nora Daniels stumbled through the abandoned mining camp on the outskirts of town, her throat raw and bleeding, her once beautiful calico dress torn and stained with the red dust of the Nevada desert. For 3 days, she had been trapped in an abandoned mine shaft after fleeing from the men who had murdered her father, and though she had screamed until her voice disappeared completely, no one had come until now. Samuel Lawson was returning from a cattle drive when he spotted something unusual moving among the dilapidated structures of the old Silver Top mine. Dust-covered and nearly delirious from dehydration, Nora collapsed just as Samuel dismounted his horse. Her lips moved frantically, but no sound emerged beyond a painful rasp that made Samuel wince in sympathy. "Easy now," he said, his voice deliberately low and gentle as he knelt beside her. "Don't try to speak. You're safe now." The year was 1876, and Unionville was already past its prime. Once a booming silver town, it now housed only the most determined residents, those who believed the mountains still held treasure, those who had nowhere else to go, and those who were hiding from something. Samuel belonged to none of those categories. He was simply passing through on his way to deliver cattle to Virginia City when fate placed him in Nora's path. "Water," he whispered, retrieving his canteen. "Small sips only. Too much will make you sick." Nora's hands trembled as she reached for the canteen, her blue eyes wide with fear and gratitude. Samuel steadied her hands with his own calloused from years of ranch work, but surprisingly gentle. As the tepid water soothed her parched throat, tears streamed down her dirt-stained face. "I'm Samuel Lawson," he said, keeping his voice soft and calm. "Can you tell me your name? Just nod if it hurts too much to try." She swallowed painfully and mouthed Nora before gesturing helplessly at her throat. "All right, Miss Nora," Samuel said, his dark eyes studying her injuries with concern. "I'm going to take you into town. The doctor there can help you." He hesitated, then asked, "Is someone after you?" Terror flashed across her face and she nodded frantically, pointing back toward the mountains. "Then we'll be careful," he promised, helping her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Lean back against me if you need to. It's about an hour's ride to town." As they rode, Samuel kept his arm protectively around Nora's waist, feeling her gradually relax against him as exhaustion overcame fear. The Nevada landscape stretched out before them, rugged mountains in the distance, sagebrush dotting the valley floor, and the relentless blue sky above. Samuel had never considered himself a particularly talkative man, but he found himself speaking softly to Nora throughout the journey, describing the land, telling her about his horse, Granite, and assuring her repeatedly that she was safe now. Doc Miller's office sat at the edge of Unionville, a whitewashed building with blue trim that stood out among the weathered structures surrounding it. The doctor, a portly man with kind eyes and prematurely white hair, took one look at Nora and ushered them inside. "What happened to her?" he asked, guiding Nora to an examination table. "Found her out by the Silver Top," Samuel explained. "She can't speak, seems like she screamed herself hoarse. She's been without water for some time, I reckon." The doctor nodded grimly. "I'll take care of her." "You can wait outside," if Nora's hand shot out, grabbing Samuel's wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes pleaded with him to stay. "I'll stay right here," Samuel assured her, shooting the doctor a questioning glance. "As you wish," Doc Miller conceded, turning to his shelves of medicines. "But I'll need to examine her properly." Samuel stepped behind a screen to give Nora privacy, but remained in the room as promised. He listened as the doctor worked, wincing at Nora's occasional whimpers of pain. "Your throat is severely inflamed," the doctor explained to Nora. You've damaged your vocal cords from excessive screaming, and you're suffering from dehydration and exposure. With rest and proper care, your voice should return in a week or so, but you mustn't try to speak until then." When Samuel was permitted to return to Nora's side, Doc Miller handed him a small brown bottle. "Willow bark tincture for the pain. 3 drops in water, 3 times daily. She needs complete vocal rest, plenty of fluids, and somewhere safe to recover." The doctor paused, studying Samuel. "Do you know this young woman, Mr. Lawson?" "No, sir. Just found her out there by Providence." "Well, she needs care. The hotel isn't suitable for a woman in her condition, and Mrs. Peterson's boarding house is full with those miners from Sacramento." Samuel hesitated only briefly. "My sister runs the millinery shop. She has a room above the store. I'm sure she'd take Miss Nora in until we sort this out." The doctor nodded approvingly. "Very good. I'll come by tomorrow to check on her." He turned to Nora, speaking deliberately so she could read his lips. "You're safe now, young lady. Mr. Lawson here is one of our most respected citizens." Nora's eyes moved between the two men, uncertainty evident in her expression, but she nodded slowly. She had little choice but to trust these strangers. The millinery shop on Main Street was closed when they arrived, but light glowed from the windows above. Samuel helped Nora down from his horse and led her to the side entrance, knocking firmly on the door. "Who is it?" called a female voice. "It's Sam. I need your help, Rebecca." The door swung open to reveal a slender woman with Samuel's dark eyes but softer features. Her expression shifted from welcome to concern as she took in Nora's disheveled appearance. "Good heavens! What happened?" "This is Miss Nora," Samuel explained. "Found her out by Silver Top Mine. She's been hurt and needs somewhere safe to stay." Rebecca Lawson didn't hesitate. "Bring her upstairs. I'll heat some water for a bath." She touched Nora's arm gently. "Don't worry, dear. You're among friends now." While Rebecca prepared a bath in the small room behind the kitchen, Samuel explained everything he knew about Nora's situation, which wasn't much. "She can't speak," he concluded. "Doc says it might be a week before her voice returns." "Poor thing," Rebecca murmured. "Those mines are dangerous. She's lucky you found her." She paused, studying her brother's concerned expression. "You think there's more to her story, don't you?" Samuel nodded grimly. "She's terrified of something or someone. When she's rested, maybe she can write down what happened." After ensuring Nora was comfortably settled with Rebecca, Samuel reluctantly took his leave. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised, tipping his hat to both women. "Miss Nora, try to rest easy. You're safe with my sister." That night, as he sat smoking on the porch of his small ranch house outside town, Samuel found his thoughts returning to the woman with the terrified blue eyes. Something about her vulnerability combined with her evident determination to survive had affected him deeply. In his 30 years, he'd seen plenty of tragedy in the West, but there was something about Nora Daniels that made him want to personally ensure nothing bad ever happened to her again. The next morning, Samuel rode into town earlier than usual. He stopped first at the sheriff's office, where he found Sheriff Taylor drinking coffee and reading a week-old newspaper from Carson City. "Morning, Sam," the sheriff greeted him. "Heard you brought in some poor soul you found out by Silver Top yesterday." News traveled fast in Unionville. "That's right," Samuel confirmed. "Young woman named Nora. She can't speak, hurt her throat screaming for help, according to Doc Miller." Sheriff Taylor set down his coffee. "Any idea what she was doing out there? That mine's been abandoned for 3 years." "Not yet. She seems scared of something, though. I thought I'd ask if you've heard about anyone looking for a young woman or any trouble in the area." The sheriff stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Nothing specific. There was talk of some trouble over in Lovelock stagecoach robbery that turned deadly." But that was a good 50 miles from here. Samuel nodded, filing away the information. Well, when she can talk or write down her story, I'll bring her by. You do that. Meanwhile, I'll keep my ears open. From the sheriff's office, Samuel headed to Rebecca's shop. He found his sister arranging a display of ladies' hats in the front window. "How is she?" he asked without preamble. Rebecca smiled knowingly at her brother's concern. "Better this morning. I gave her paper and pencil, and she wrote down her name, Nora Daniels. She's still very weak, though, and frightened. She jumps at every sound. Can I see her?" Rebecca nodded toward the stairs. "She's having some broth in the kitchen. Go on up. Your presence seemed to calm her yesterday." Samuel took the stairs 2 at a time, removing his hat as he entered Rebecca's small apartment. He found Nora at the kitchen table, dressed in one of Rebecca's nightgowns with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair, clean now, was the color of wheat in summer, falling in waves around a face that, despite its pallor, was strikingly beautiful. "Morning, Miss Daniels," he said, keeping his voice soft as he had the day before. "You're looking better today." Nora's eyes brightened at the sight of him. She gestured to the chair opposite her, then pointed to a piece of paper on the table. "Thank you for saving my life," she had written in an elegant hand. Samuel sat down, placing his hat on the table. "Anyone would have done the same," he said modestly. "How are you feeling this morning?" Nora picked up her pencil. "Throat still hurts. Very tired. But alive thanks to you. Do you feel up to telling me what happened, how you ended up in that mine?" Fear clouded her eyes, but she nodded resolutely and began to write. Samuel waited patiently as her pencil moved across the paper. "My father and I were traveling to Virginia City. He was a banker from San Francisco. We were attacked by 3 men on the road. They shot my father. I ran. They chased me. I hid in the mine for 3 days, so thirsty, screamed until I couldn't anymore." Samuel read the words, anger building inside him. "I'm so sorry about your father," he said gently. "These men, would you recognize them?" Nora nodded emphatically and wrote. One had a scar across his cheek. Another was missing 2 fingers. The leader wore a black coat with silver buttons. "Did they take anything from your father?" "Everything. Money, papers. They said something about a deed." Samuel frowned. "A deed to what?" Nora shrugged and wrote, "Don't know. Father didn't tell me details, said it was safer that way. And you have nowhere to go now." Her pencil hovered over the paper before she wrote. "No family left. Father was everything." Samuel felt a surge of protectiveness. "You can stay here as long as you need. Rebecca enjoys the company, and no one will harm you in Unionville." Gratitude shone in her eyes, but uncertainty remained. She wrote quickly. "The men said they would find me, said I saw too much." "I'll speak to the sheriff," Samuel assured her. "We'll post guards if necessary, but first you need to rest and recover your voice." He hesitated, then added, "Would it be all right if I visited you again tomorrow?" The smile that brightened her face was answer enough, but she wrote anyway, "Please do. Your voice is comforting." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Samuel would complete his morning chores at the ranch, then ride into town to visit Nora. Sometimes they would sit in Rebecca's kitchen, while Nora communicated through written notes. Other times, when Nora felt stronger, Samuel would escort her on short walks around town, always vigilant, always keeping her within arm's reach. On the 4th day after he found her, they sat on a bench outside the general store, enjoying the late afternoon sunshine. Nora looked markedly better. Some color had returned to her cheeks, and she had borrowed a blue dress from Rebecca that complemented her eyes. "Doc Miller says you might try speaking a little tomorrow," Samuel told her. "Just a few words at first." Nora nodded and wrote on the small notepad she now carried everywhere, "I'm nervous. What if my voice never comes back properly?" "It will," Samuel assured her. "Doc says you're healing well." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the townspeople go about their business. Unionville wasn't the boomtown it had once been, but it still had a certain charm, false-fronted buildings lining the main street, hitching posts outside every establishment, and mountains rising majestically in the distance. "I came here in '63, Samuel told her, during the Silver Rush. Worked the mines for a while, then realized I preferred the open air and started raising cattle instead." He smiled ruefully. "Never struck it rich, but I've got my own spread now. It's small, but it's mine." Nora wrote, "You seem content. That's worth more than silver." Samuel studied her thoughtfully. "What about you? What was your life like in San Francisco?" Her pencil moved quickly. "Comfortable but confined. Father was protective after Mother died. I rarely left our home except for church and approved social functions. I was expected to make a good marriage." "And did you have a suitor?" Samuel asked, trying to sound casual. Nora smiled and shook her head, writing, "Father thought I was too young at 20. Said there was time enough for marriage later." Samuel felt an unexpected relief at her answer, then immediately chided himself for the sentiment. This woman had just lost her father and was being hunted by dangerous men. His growing feelings for her were inappropriate under the circumstances. "We should head back," he said, standing and offering her his arm. "Rebecca will be wondering where we are." As they walked, Samuel remained alert, studying every stranger they passed. Sheriff Taylor had sent telegrams to neighboring towns asking about the men Nora had described, but so far, no useful information had come back. The stagecoach robbery near Lovelock had indeed been bloody, 3 passengers killed, including a banker from San Francisco, but without confirmation that this was Nora's father, they couldn't be certain the events were connected. That evening, Samuel stayed for dinner at Rebecca's invitation. The 3 of them sat around the small table, with Rebecca carrying most of the conversation while Nora occasionally wrote notes, and Samuel found himself watching Nora more than was strictly proper. "Sam tells me you're from San Francisco," Rebecca said to Nora. "I've always wanted to visit. They say the shops there are magnificent." Nora nodded enthusiastically and wrote, "Beautiful city. Lots of fog but wonderful shops. You would love the fabric stores." "Perhaps someday," Rebecca sighed. "Though I can't imagine leaving Sam alone out here. He'd probably forget to eat if I wasn't in town to remind him." Samuel rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "I managed just fine before you followed me west, Becky." "Is that so? As I recall, you were living in a tent and eating beans straight from the can." Their banter made Nora smile, though Samuel noticed a sadness in her eyes as she watched their sibling interaction. He imagined she was thinking of her father and the family she had lost. After dinner, Rebecca insisted on clearing up alone, pointedly suggesting that Samuel and Nora might enjoy some air on the small balcony outside the sitting room. The space was hardly more than a glorified fire escape, but it offered a view of the mountains to the east, now painted purple by the setting sun. "Rebecca thinks she's being subtle," Samuel said apologetically as they stood side by side at the railing. "She's been trying to marry me off for years." Nora smiled and wrote, "She loves you. It's nice to see." "We've always been close," Samuel admitted. "Our parents died when we were young. Fever took them both in the same week. I was 16, Becky just 14. We had an uncle who took us in, but he wasn't much interested in raising children. As soon as I turned 18, I headed west and saved every penny to bring Becky out 2 years later." Nora touched his arm sympathetically, then wrote, "You're a good man, Samuel Lawson." The simple compliment affected him more than it should have. "I try to be," he said quietly. "Though I haven't always succeeded." They stood in silence as darkness fell over Unionville. The air cooled rapidly, as it often did in the high desert, and Samuel noticed Nora shiver slightly. "We should go inside," he suggested, reluctantly breaking the peaceful moment. "It's getting cold." As they turned to go, a movement in the street below caught Samuel's eye. A man on horseback had stopped across from the millinery, studying the building with unusual interest. Even in the gathering darkness, Samuel could make out the glint of silver buttons on the rider's black coat. Samuel instinctively pulled Nora away from the railing. "Inside," he whispered urgently. "Now." Once inside, he closed the curtains and turned to find Rebecca looking at them questioningly. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I think one of the men who attacked Nora is outside," Samuel explained in a low voice. "The one in the black coat with silver buttons." Fear flooded Nora's face. She clutched Samuel's arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "Stay here," he instructed both women. "Lock the door behind me." "I'm going to get the sheriff." Nora shook her head frantically and scribbled on her notepad. "They'll kill you too." "I'll be careful," he promised. "But we can't let them get away. This might be our only chance to catch them." Before either woman could protest further, Samuel slipped out the door. Instead of going down the main stairs, which would have put him in plain view of the street, he used the back route through the storeroom and emerged in the alley behind the shop. Moving stealthily, Samuel made his way to the sheriff's office. To his relief, Sheriff Taylor was still there, cleaning his revolver by lamplight. "They're here," Samuel said without preamble. "At least one of them the leader. He's watching Rebecca's place right now." The sheriff immediately stood, buckling on his gunbelt. "You sure it's them?" "Black coat, silver buttons, just like Nora described. He's not here for shopping, that's certain." "Let me gather a few men," the sheriff decided. "We'll surround him." "There's no time," Samuel argued. "He could move on any minute, or his companions might be nearby." Sheriff Taylor considered this, then nodded. "All right. You circle around behind him. I'll approach from the front. But Sam, no heroics. This is official business." Samuel agreed, though inwardly he knew he would do whatever was necessary to protect Nora. The two men separated, with the sheriff heading down Main Street while Samuel doubled back through the alleys. When he emerged onto the street, Samuel spotted the rider immediately. The man had dismounted and was tying his horse to a post near the saloon, directly across from Rebecca's shop. In the light spilling from the saloon windows, Samuel could clearly see the scar Nora had described, a jagged line running from the man's left eye to his jaw. Samuel watched as Sheriff Taylor approached the stranger, casual but alert. The two men exchanged words that Samuel couldn't hear from his position. Then, without warning, the scarred man drew his gun. Samuel reacted instantly, rushing forward even as the sheriff dove for cover. The scarred man fired once, the shot going wild, before Samuel tackled him to the ground. They struggled briefly before Samuel managed to pin the man down, pressing his forearm against the outlaw's throat. "You move, you die," Samuel growled, all pretense of gentleness gone from his voice. Sheriff Taylor was there in seconds, handcuffs ready. "Nice work, Sam," he said, breathing heavily. "Let's get this snake locked up." Once the man was secured in the town's small jail, Sheriff Taylor began his questioning. The prisoner, who reluctantly identified himself as Jake Harmon, remained defiantly silent about his business in Unionville. "We know about the stagecoach robbery near Lovelock," the sheriff pressed. "We know about the banker from San Francisco." Harmon's eyes narrowed. "Don't know what you're talking about, lawman." "Where are your friends?" Samuel demanded. "The one missing 2 fingers and whoever else was with you." A flicker of surprise crossed Harmon's face before he masked it. "I ride alone." "Not according to our witness," the sheriff countered. Harmon lunged against his chains. "What witness?" he snarled. "That girl, she's supposed to be dead." Samuel had to restrain himself from striking the man. The casual way he referenced Nora's intended murder made his blood boil. "Why were you after her?" Sheriff Taylor asked, placing a restraining hand on Samuel's shoulder. "What was so important about her father?" Harmon sneered. "You think I'm going to tell you anything?" "Ellis will be looking for me when I don't show up with the girl. He'll burn this town to the ground." "Ellis?" The sheriff pounced on the name. "Ellis who?" But Harmon's momentary slip had made him more cautious. He pressed his lips together and refused to say another word. Outside the jail, Sheriff Taylor turned to Samuel. "We need to get the girl somewhere safe. If this Ellis fellow is coming to look for his partner, Unionville isn't secure enough." Samuel nodded grimly. "I'll take her to my ranch. It's isolated, defensible, and no stranger could approach without being seen for miles." "Good plan. I'll send a deputy out first thing tomorrow to keep watch. Meanwhile, I'll telegraph Carson City for reinforcements and see what we can learn about this Ellis character." When Samuel returned to Rebecca's apartment, he found both women huddled in the sitting room, a shotgun across Rebecca's lap. "You got him?" Rebecca asked as soon as Samuel entered. "He's locked up," Samuel confirmed. "But there are others, and they know Nora's alive." He turned to Nora, whose face had gone pale. "We need to move you somewhere safer. Will you trust me to take you to my ranch outside town?" Nora hesitated only briefly before nodding. She wrote, "When do we leave?" "Now. Tonight. Pack whatever you need. Rebecca can bring anything else tomorrow." Within half an hour, they were ready. Samuel had borrowed a wagon from the livery stable, reasoning that it would be more comfortable for Nora than riding horseback. Rebecca had packed food, medicines, and clothing, including some of her own dresses that she'd hastily altered to fit Nora's smaller frame. "Be careful," Rebecca urged as she hugged her brother goodbye. "Those men sound dangerous." "We'll be fine," Samuel assured her, though he shared her concerns. To Nora, he said, "It's about an hour's ride. The roads are rough, but we'll go slowly." The night was clear, with a half-moon providing enough light to navigate the rutted road leading out of town. Samuel kept one hand on the reins and the other on his rifle, scanning the darkness constantly for any sign of danger. Beside him, Nora sat rigidly, starting at every sound from the surrounding wilderness. "Try to rest," Samuel suggested gently. "I'll keep watch." She shook her head and wrote by the dim light of the wagon's small lantern, too frightened to sleep. "That's understandable. Would it help if I talked? Rebecca always says my voice puts her to sleep." He smiled, trying to lighten the mood. Nora nodded gratefully, and Samuel began to speak, keeping his voice low and steady as he had when he first found her. He told her about his ranch, the small but solid house he'd built himself, the spring-fed creek that ran across his property, the herd of cattle he was slowly building. He described the wildflowers that bloomed across the meadows in spring, and the way the mountains looked when snow dusted their peaks in winter. As he talked, he felt Nora gradually relax beside him. By the time they turned onto the narrow track leading to his ranch, her head was resting against his shoulder, her eyes closed in exhausted sleep. Samuel's ranch house came into view, a simple structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch across the front and corrals to one side. A small bunkhouse stood nearby, currently empty since Samuel managed the ranch alone most of the time, hiring help only during roundup and branding. Not wanting to wake Nora, Samuel gently lifted her from the wagon and carried her inside. The house was cool and dark, smelling faintly of wood smoke and coffee. He placed Nora on his bed, covering her with a quilt his sister had made, then quietly went back outside to care for the horses and bring in their supplies. By the time he returned, Nora was awake, sitting up in bed and looking around the unfamiliar room with confusion that turned to relief when Samuel entered. "You fell asleep," he explained, setting down Rebecca's bag of supplies. "I didn't want to wake you." He gestured awkwardly around the sparse but tidy room. "This is my place. Not fancy, but it's safe." Nora wrote, "It's lovely. Thank you for everything." "You should try to get more rest," Samuel suggested. "I'll sleep in the main room. If you need anything in the night, just knock on the wall." She nodded, but as he turned to leave, she quickly wrote, "Samuel, I'm scared." The simple admission touched him deeply. "I know," he said softly, "but I promise you're safe here. No one will harm you while I'm alive." The intensity of his words surprised them both. Nora's eyes widened slightly, and Samuel felt a flush creep up his neck. "Try to sleep," he said more briskly. "Things will look better in the morning." Samuel spent a restless night on a bedroll near the fireplace, waking at every sound, his hand never far from his revolver. He rose before dawn, moving quietly around the kitchen to prepare coffee and a simple breakfast of biscuits and bacon. The aroma of food cooking eventually brought Nora from the bedroom. She had changed into one of Rebecca's dresses, a simple calico that was slightly too large but clean and presentable. Her hair was neatly braided, and some of the haunted look had left her eyes. "Good morning," Samuel greeted her. "Coffee," she nodded eagerly and accepted the cup he offered. After taking a cautious sip, she reached for her notepad. "Delicious. Best coffee since San Francisco." Samuel chuckled. "Don't let Rebecca hear you say that. She thinks her coffee is the best this side of the Mississippi." They ate breakfast in companionable silence, with Samuel occasionally pointing out features of the ranch visible through the windows. The morning light revealed a sweeping view of the valley below and mountains beyond, a landscape both harsh and beautiful. "I need to check on the cattle," Samuel said when they'd finished eating. "Will you be all right here alone for a couple of hours? The doors lock from inside, and there's a shotgun in that cabinet if you need it." Nora bit her lip nervously but nodded and wrote, "I'll be fine. Please be careful." "Always am," he assured her with a smile that belied his own concerns. The men who had attacked Nora and her father were clearly dangerous, and the one called Ellis was still out there somewhere. But Samuel couldn't neglect his responsibilities, and the cattle needed checking. He saddled Granite and rode out, keeping to the high ground where he could maintain a clear view of the approaches to the ranch house. His cattle, about 60 head of mixed Herefords and Longhorns, were grazing peacefully in the western pasture. Nothing seemed amiss, but Samuel couldn't shake a feeling of unease that kept him constantly scanning the horizon. When he returned to the house mid-morning, he was relieved to find Nora safe. She had apparently kept herself busy in his absence. The kitchen was tidier than he'd ever seen it, and she'd found an old book of poetry on his shelf that she was reading by the window. "Your home is wonderful," she wrote when he entered. "So peaceful here." "It's usually just me," Samuel admitted, pouring himself more coffee. "Gets lonely sometimes, but I prefer it to town." He hesitated, then added, "You're welcome to stay as long as you need to, even after your voice returns." Nora's expression softened. "Thank you. I have nowhere else to go now." The simple statement reminded Samuel of all she had lost. "We'll figure something out," he promised. "Once those men are caught and you're truly safe." Around noon, Sheriff Taylor's deputy arrived as promised, bringing news from town. The prisoner, Jake Harmon, had finally revealed more information after a night in the cell. Sheriff got him talking about the stagecoach robbery, Deputy Wilson reported. "Turns out they weren't after the regular cargo. They specifically targeted your father's stagecoach, Miss Daniels." Nora's hand trembled as she wrote, "Why?" "Something about mining rights," the deputy explained. "Your father had purchased a claim near Virginia City, supposedly played out, but Harmon says their boss, Ellis Crawford, believes there's still a fortune in silver there. Your father had the deed, which they stole, but apparently there's some legal document needed to validate it that only your father knew about." Samuel frowned. "So they killed him for nothing?" "Not in their minds. Harmon says Crawford is convinced the validation document is hidden somewhere, and that you might know where it is." The deputy looked apologetically at Nora. "That's why they've been hunting you." Nora shook her head emphatically and wrote, "Father never told me anything about documents or mining claims. I knew we were going to Virginia City for business, nothing more." "Doesn't matter to men like that," Samuel said grimly. "They believe you know something, which makes you a threat." Deputy Wilson nodded agreement. "Sheriffs wired the authorities in Virginia City and Carson City. They're sending men, but it might be a couple of days. In the meantime, he suggests you stay out here. It's more defensible than the jail if Crawford and his men come looking for trouble." After the deputy left, promising to return with more news the following day, Samuel found Nora sitting on the porch, staring out at the mountains with a troubled expression. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling into the chair beside her. She wrote slowly, "I keep thinking about Father. He was so excited about this trip, said it would secure my future. Now he's gone and I'm being hunted by killers." Samuel wished he could offer more than hollow reassurances. "I'm sorry about your father," he said quietly. "He sounds like he was a good man who cared deeply for you." "He was," Nora wrote. "After Mother died, he devoted himself to raising me properly. Sometimes too properly. He was very protective." She paused, then added, "I always dreamed of adventure, of seeing the real West. Not like this, though." "The West can be beautiful," Samuel told her. "But it's also harsh and unforgiving. Takes a special kind of strength to thrive here." She studied him for a moment, then wrote, "You have that strength. I can see it in you." The simple compliment warmed him in a way he hadn't expected. "So do you," he replied. "Most people wouldn't have survived what you've been through." As the day progressed, Samuel kept busy with ranch chores, always keeping Nora within sight. She seemed content to follow him around, watching as he repaired a section of fence, fed the horses, and checked on a newborn calf in the barn. By late afternoon, when they returned to the house, a comfortable familiarity had developed between them, as if they'd known each other far longer than just a few days. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Nora suddenly cleared her throat and whispered, "Thank you." The words were raspy and clearly painful to produce, but they were audible. Samuel looked up in surprise. "Your voice, it's coming back," she nodded, wincing slightly, and wrote, "Doctor said I could try a little. Still hurts." "Then don't push it," Samuel advised, though he was delighted to hear her speak for the first time. "Your voice will return fully when it's ready." The next day brought no news from town, which Samuel took as a good sign. He and Nora fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural, sharing meals, working together around the ranch, and spending evenings by the fire. Nora still communicated primarily through writing, but occasionally tested her returning voice with a word or short phrase. On the third morning, Samuel woke at dawn to find Nora already in the kitchen, attempting to make biscuits. The sight of her covered in flour, concentration furrowing her brow as she kneaded dough, made something twist pleasantly in his chest. "Need help?" he offered. She smiled and shook her head, whispering, "My turn to cook." Her voice was still hoarse but growing stronger each day. "Where did you learn to make biscuits? I thought you had servants in San Francisco." She wrote, "Our cook taught me secretly. Father thought kitchen work unsuitable for a banker's daughter, but I enjoyed it." "Well, they smell delicious," Samuel said, pouring coffee for both of them. "Better than mine, I expect." They ate breakfast together, with Samuel telling stories about his early days in Nevada that made Nora laugh, a raspy sound that she covered with her hand, embarrassed by its harshness. "Don't hide it," Samuel said impulsively. "I like your laugh." A blush crept across her cheeks, and she looked down at her plate. It was then that Samuel realized how deeply his feelings for Nora had grown in just a few days. What had begun as simple concern for a woman in distress had developed into something much more profound. But the timing couldn't be worse. She was still recovering from trauma, still in danger, still grieving her father. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Samuel immediately tensed, reaching for the rifle he kept near the door. "Stay inside," he instructed Nora, moving to the window. To his relief, it was Deputy Wilson returning as promised. But the grave expression on the deputy's face suggested his news wasn't good. "Crawford broke Harmon out of jail last night," Wilson reported without preamble. "They shot Sheriff Taylor. He's alive but in bad shape. Doc Miller's with him." Samuel felt his stomach drop. How many men with Crawford? 3 that we saw. They rode out of town heading east in this direction. Nora had come to the doorway, her face pale with fear. "Coming here," she whispered. Deputy Wilson nodded grimly. "Sheriff managed to tell me to warn you before Doc gave him laudanum for the pain. Said Crawford mentioned something about finishing it today." Samuel's mind raced. 4 armed men against himself and 1 deputy made for poor odds. How far behind you were they? "At least a couple of hours. I came cross-country to avoid being seen." "That gives us some time to prepare," Samuel decided. "Nora, pack only what you need. We might have to leave quickly." To Wilson, he said, "Help me barricade the windows. If they come, we want to make it as difficult as possible for them." The next hour was spent in grim preparation. Samuel moved his small herd to the far pasture to keep them out of the line of fire. He and Wilson fortified the house as best they could, moving furniture to block windows and stockpiling ammunition near strategic positions. Nora worked alongside them, her fear evident but controlled. When Samuel suggested she might hide in the root cellar beneath the kitchen, she shook her head firmly and wrote, "I won't hide while you risk your lives. I can shoot." "Your father taught you?" Samuel asked, surprised. "No, our gardener did. Father never knew." Despite the dire circumstances, Samuel couldn't help but smile. "You're full of surprises, Miss Daniels." By mid-afternoon, there was still no sign of Crawford and his men. The waiting had frayed everyone's nerves, with Deputy Wilson constantly checking the approaches through field glasses and Samuel double-checking their defenses. "Maybe they're not coming," Wilson suggested hopefully. "Maybe they headed to Virginia City instead." "They're coming," Samuel said with certainty. "Men like that don't leave loose ends." As if to confirm his words, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, moving steadily closer to the ranch. 4 riders, Wilson confirmed, lowering his field glasses. "Coming fast." Samuel turned to Nora, who stood by the window, a small revolver clutched in her shaking hand. "Last chance to hide," he told her gently. She shook her head and whispered, her voice stronger than before, "No more running." The approaching riders slowed as they neared the ranch, spreading out to approach from different directions. Samuel recognized the tactic. They were planning to surround the house. "Wilson, take the back," Samuel ordered. "I'll cover the front. Nora, stay low and reload for us." Through the partially blocked windows, Samuel watched as the riders dismounted about 100 yards from the house, using the terrain for cover. One man, taller than the others and wearing a black coat, stepped forward. "That's Ellis Crawford," Deputy Wilson confirmed. "Lawson," Crawford shouted. "We know you've got the girl. Send her out and nobody else needs to get hurt." "Not going to happen, Crawford," Samuel called back. "There's a deputy U.S. Marshal in here with me and more on the way." "Your best bet is to ride out now," Crawford laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "You're bluffing. That fool of a sheriff is laid up and any marshals are days away. We just want the girl and whatever she knows about her father's documents." "I don't know anything," Nora suddenly shouted, her damaged voice cracking with the effort. "My father never told me about any mining claim. She's lying." One of Crawford's men yelled. Old man Daniels wouldn't have traveled all this way without the validation papers. Crawford signaled to his men, who began moving closer, using rocks and scrub brush for cover. "Last chance, Lawson. The girl or your life." Samuel's answer was a warning shot that kicked up dust near Crawford's feet. The outlaw dove for cover, and the shooting began in earnest. Bullets thudded into the walls of the ranch house as Samuel and Deputy Wilson returned fire through narrow gaps in the barricades. Nora crouched between them, loading spare revolvers with trembling hands. "They're trying to work around to the back," Wilson called. "Two of them moving that way." Samuel managed to hit one of the men, not Crawford, who fell with a cry of pain, but was dragged to safety by his companion. The momentary victory was short-lived, however, as a fusillade of bullets shattered one of the barricaded windows, sending splinters of wood and glass flying. A sharp cry from Wilson told Samuel the deputy had been hit. Nora immediately crawled to his side, pressing a cloth against the bleeding wound in his shoulder. "Just grazed me," Wilson gasped, "but I can't shoot straight now." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. With Wilson wounded and ammunition running low, Samuel knew they couldn't hold out much longer. He was considering a desperate plan to get Nora out through the back while he provided covering fire when he heard a sound that made his heart leap. More horses approaching, and lots of them. Crawford heard it too. "What the hell?" he shouted to his men. "Who's that coming?" Samuel risked a glance through the window and saw a welcome sight: at least a dozen riders approaching at a gallop, led by a man he recognized as Marshal Davis from Carson City. Behind them, incredibly, was Rebecca, clinging desperately to a horse. "It's the marshal," Samuel shouted to Nora and Wilson. "And Becky's with them." Outside, Crawford and his remaining men were frantically mounting their horses, attempting to flee. Marshal Davis's voice boomed across the ranch yard. "U.S. Marshals, drop your weapons and surrender." Two of Crawford's men immediately raised their hands, but Crawford himself spurred his horse toward the eastern ridge. He didn't get far. Three marshals cut him off, and after a brief exchange of gunfire, Crawford tumbled from his saddle. The entire confrontation was over in minutes. When Samuel finally opened the door, he found Marshal Davis overseeing the handcuffing of the surviving outlaws while Rebecca rushed toward the house. "Sam, thank God you're all right," she cried, throwing her arms around her brother. "When Sheriff Taylor was shot, I knew they'd be coming here next." "How did you get the marshals here so quickly?" Samuel asked, still amazed by their timely arrival. "They were already on their way from Carson City," Rebecca explained. "Sheriff Taylor's telegrams got through before he was shot. When Crawford broke Harmon out of jail, I rode to the telegraph office and sent another urgent message. Then I insisted on coming with them to show them the way to your ranch." Marshal Davis approached, his weathered face serious. "Quite a firefight you had here, Lawson. Deputy Wilson injured, shoulder wound, not too serious," Samuel reported. "Crawford, dead," the marshal said flatly. "Wouldn't surrender. The others are talking already, trying to save their skins. Seems this was about more than just robbery. Crawford was working for someone bigger, someone with political connections who wanted that mining claim badly enough to kill for it." Nora had appeared in the doorway, still holding the blood-stained cloth she'd used on Wilson's wound. "My father?" she asked hoarsely. Marshal Davis removed his hat respectfully. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Daniels, but your father's killer won't hurt anyone else now." In the days that followed, the full story emerged. Nora's father had indeed purchased a supposedly played-out silver mine near Virginia City, based on information that a new vein of ore had been discovered, but kept secret. The validation document Crawford had been seeking was actually a geological survey, proving the mine's value, a document that was found, ironically, in Nora's father's pocket watch, which she had been wearing since his death. The mine was rightfully Nora's now, and according to the marshal, it was likely worth a considerable fortune. The man behind Crawford, a prominent state senator with mining interests, was under investigation, his political career in ruins. "What will you do now?" Samuel asked Nora as they sat on his porch a week after the shootout. Her voice had returned almost completely, though it retained a slightly husky quality that Samuel found unexpectedly appealing. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I could return to San Francisco, I suppose, but there's nothing for me there now. The mine will provide financial security, but—" "But what?" Samuel prompted gently. Nora looked out at the landscape she had come to love, the sweeping valleys, the distant mountains, the clear blue Nevada sky. "But I've found something here I never had in San Francisco, a sense of belonging, of freedom." Samuel's heart quickened. "You could stay," he suggested, trying to keep his tone casual. "Nevada could use more people like you." "People who bring trouble and gunfights," she asked with a small smile. "People with courage," Samuel corrected. "People who face their fears instead of running from them." Nora was silent for a long moment before saying, "If I stayed, what would I do? Where would I live?" The question hung between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Samuel had rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times over the past week, but now that it had arrived, words failed him. "You could live here," he finally said, his voice rougher than he intended. "With me, if you wanted to." Nora's eyes widened. "Samuel, are you—" "I know it's too soon," he interrupted hastily. "We've only known each other a few weeks, and you're still recovering from everything that happened. But I've never felt this way about anyone before, Nora. When I found you that day, something changed in me. And every day since then, I've fallen more in." He didn't get to finish. Nora crossed the space between them and pressed her lips to his, effectively silencing his nervous rambling. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes." Samuel repeated, hardly daring to believe. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll live here with you. Yes to everything, Samuel Lawson." He gathered her into his arms, marveling at how perfectly she fit there, as if she'd been meant for him all along. "I love you, Nora Daniels," he whispered against her hair. "I think I've loved you since the moment I found you." "And I love you," she replied, her once-lost voice strong and clear. "You spoke softly to me when I couldn't answer, and in doing so, you spoke directly to my heart." They were married in the small church in Unionville 2 months later, with Rebecca serving as Nora's maid of honor and the newly recovered Sheriff Taylor standing up for Samuel. The whole town turned out for the celebration, everyone by now familiar with the dramatic story of how they had met. The mine near Virginia City proved as valuable as predicted, providing Nora with the means to help Samuel expand his ranch and build a larger house, though they kept the original cabin intact, too sentimental to tear it down. Rebecca used some of Nora's investment to expand her millinery shop into a proper ladies' emporium, which quickly became the most fashionable establishment between Carson City and Reno. As for Nora's voice, it never quite returned to what it had been before her ordeal. The damage from those days of screaming for help left a permanent huskiness that became her trademark. Samuel often told her it was his favorite sound in the world, a reminder of how close he had come to never finding her at all. 5 years later, Samuel and Nora stood on the porch of their home, watching their 3-year-old son, William, chase butterflies in the meadow while their infant daughter, Elizabeth, slept peacefully in Nora's arms. The ranch had prospered, with a herd now numbering over 300 head and 4 permanent ranch hands living in the expanded bunkhouse. "Any regrets?" Samuel asked, slipping his arm around his wife's waist. "About staying in Nevada instead of returning to civilization?" Nora leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years of their marriage. "Not a single one," she assured him. "This is where I belong, where we belong, even with all the hardships." He pressed, thinking of the harsh winters they'd weathered, the drought 2 years ago that had nearly ruined them, the lingering nightmares Nora sometimes still experienced. "Especially with the hardships," she replied softly. "They make the good times that much sweeter." She looked up at him with the same blue eyes that had captured his heart on that fateful day outside the abandoned mine. "Besides, I found something in Nevada I never would have found in San Francisco." "What's that?" Samuel asked, though he already knew the answer. "A love worth screaming for," she said, her voice forever changed but infinitely precious, carrying across the land they had made their own. "A love worth losing my voice for, because I found a man who knew exactly what to say when I couldn't speak at all." Samuel kissed her then, with the same tenderness he'd shown when he first found her, a lost, voiceless woman who had become the heart and soul of his world. Around them, the Nevada landscape stretched endlessly toward the horizon, as vast and full of promise as the life they had built together from the most unlikely of beginnings.